that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. Happy Father's Day, or recently past Father's Day, to all who fall in that category. Let's get started. The immigration separation ruse. By that, I'm speaking of the policy that people are misinterpreting, where families are being ripped apart and children are being taken from their mother's arms, obviously kicking, screaming, crying. Of course, we're not really seeing any of that, but that is irrelevant. The issue is the Trump administration is separating children from families and breaking up families at the border. Now, of course, the people who are complaining most vociferously about this are progressives and other leftists. They tend to overlook the fact that this had been happening in the 8 years prior to Donald Trump, but of course, they liked that particular president, so it doesn't matter. Rich Lowry put a piece in the National Review that laid things out from a factual basis, but unfortunately, a lot of this doesn't matter because it is factual. I will excerpt. For the longest time, illegal immigration was driven by single males from Mexico. Over the last decade, the flow has shifted to women, children, and family units from Central America. This poses challenges we haven't confronted before and has made what once were relatively minor wrinkles in law seem very large. The Trump administration isn't changing the rules that pertain to separating adults from children. They're the same. There's no change. Separation happens in one of three cases. If the officials find that the adult is falsely claiming to be the parent of the child, if they determine that the adult is a threat to the child, like maybe being a smuggler who is looking to exploit the child, okay, or if the adult is put into criminal proceedings. Stop. 2 out of those 3 things would be ones that the left would say you should never leave a child in that situation. It's terrible that they could even be found in that situation. This is somebody lying about this child so that they can get into the country, that they're probably posing a danger. And there are sex traffickers. There are drug smugglers who will happily use children. Of course, they should be separated. The last one sounds like what happens every day in the American legal system with citizen parents. They go into criminal proceedings. They don't get to take their kids with them. Not their minor children. who are arguably guilty of nothing except having certain folks as their parent. Are you catching on here? 3 things will get separation. Only one of them actually separates a family. Or all these things are intended to keep the child in good standing. They make sure that, wow. When a migrant is prosecuted for illegal entry, he or she is taken into custody by the U.S. Marshals. In no circumstance anywhere in the U.S. do the Marshals care for the children of people they take into custody. The child is taken into custody of Health and Human Services, who cares for them at temporary shelters. If you've seen these temporary shelters, it is much different from the cages that the prior administration put illegal immigrants into. The criminal proceedings can be exceptionally short, assuming there is no aggravating factors such as prior illegal entry or another crime. Let's make sure you understand this. Coming into the country illegally the first time is a misdemeanor. Re-entry is a felony. If you didn't know that, you should. Well, I don't know how all this matters. How can you not know how all this matters? The lie is there saying that the administration is breaking up families. People are lying. Let me bust down toward a quote here from a New York Times article. Some migrants have admitted they brought their children not only to remove them from danger in such places as Central America and Africa, but because they believed it would cause the authorities to release them from custody sooner. So why'd you bring your kids on this dangerous journey? Because we wouldn't stay in custody as long. Oh, but did you think about what was going to happen to your children? Others have admitted to posing falsely with children who are not their own, and Border Patrol officials say that such instances of fraud are increasing. People are faking it. According to ArizonaCentral.com, azcentral.com, it is common to have parents entrust their children to a smuggler, either as a favor or for profit. The left is stupid, but those of you who are listening to these arguments are being played. You're being played. This is not about what you think it is. Let's break some things out. There are some points to consider. In other words, why try to hold adults at all? First of all, if an asylum seeker is detained, it means that the claim goes through the process much more quickly, which is a couple of months rather than years. But you have to remember something. There's only space to hold children for 20 days. And they're now committing to a process. And let me help you out. The asylum seekers are not idiots. They know exactly what they're doing. They know what's going on, which is why the number of asylum seekers dropped precipitously when Trump was initially inaugurated or first inaugurated. And then they found out that the U.S. had not changed its policies. And now we're seeing these things increase again. A few points. Family units, if they're legitimate family units, can go home quickly. The option that both honors our laws and keeps family units together is a swift return home, not here. Home after prosecution. But immigrant advocates hate it because they want migrants to stay in the United States. Now you understand the whole thing. This is simply about continuing to bring people into this country who have no allegiance to the United States. And that's the problem with the immigration system in the first place. Too many people who have no allegiance to, no loyalty for, no affinity with the United States are allowed to come and to stay and to benefit in the same way, in much the same way that citizens do. There's a better way to claim asylum than showing up at the border with a child that's not even yours and saying, I'm in trouble. Every indication is that the migrant flow to the United States is discretionary. Nobody's being forced here. They want to come here. It nearly dried up at the beginning of the Trump administration because they thought that Trump was going to shut it down. Now they're back at it. They're back at it. Nevertheless, if you want to do this a different way, people who know they want to claim asylum, they don't wait. They don't figure that out once they get to the border. They know they want to claim asylum before they get here. So why not make your claim in the first country where they feel safe? If you don't feel safe where MS-13 operates, as soon as you get away from MS-13, and there are a few countries between where MS-13 operates and the United States, as soon as you get to that country where you don't think you're going to be killed, make your asylum claim. Second, if they feel threatened everywhere but the U.S., show up at any point of entry and make your claim there rather than entering the country. This is crazy to me what we do. And what's even more crazy is that we are allowing emotion for people who do not belong to this country override the reason that says we need to care for people in similar situations, poverty, distress, threat of violence, who actually belong here. It is ridiculous. Among the ridiculous things that I heard, and for me it was astounding, was hearing Cardinal Dolan of New York, I believe, come out and say there is no Bible passage that supports taking children from their families. And I'm like, so what part of the book of Ezra has the good cardinal not read? Because in Ezra 9, it is revealed that the nation of Israel has intermarried in violation of the law of God. In Ezra 10, the remedy that to which God did not object included taking all the foreign wives of Israeli men and the children born to them and sending them out of the country. They were expelled. And this was to restore the law, or to make up for the violation of law that had been engaged in by Israel. So he's wrong. But that's hardly new for that individual. There are a couple of laws here because Congress is all about trying to make things look good. They have a couple of laws here. One's called the Goodlatte Bill, and then there's another bill which is now being called the Compromise Bill. The Goodlatte Bill does some good things, a few. But one thing it does not do is it does not end amnesty. They're still trying to give amnesty to those who are DACA. DACA, guys, say what you want about DACA. You can love the DACA persons. You can hate them. They're still illegal immigrants. Allowing them to stay is still amnesty. We did this back in the 1980s when there were only 3 million immigrants, illegal immigrants, and that led to where we are now with more than 11 million. I don't see how allowing 700,000 more to have amnesty is going to resolve any problem. But there's a worse bill than that, which doesn't even allow for E-Verify or any of the other protections, the few protections that are part of the Goodlatte Bill. If you have to sign one, then you sign the one with the most protections for the American people and the American nation, if you're going to sign one. But here's one thing that we're missing. You can't make America great or even make America good again if you do not respect American sovereignty. And that's something that is not done by anything that is happening in the nation right now, not on the debate with immigration. If you want to make America great again, you start with the idea that there are an American people. And it is not, and make sure you understand what defines the American people, because America is not an ethnicity. The American nationality is not an ethnicity. It is a system of beliefs, and it is a pledge of loyalty and allegiance. Birth, your place of birth has nothing to do with whether or not you have that loyalty and that allegiance. It can naturally attach, but if it could only naturally attach, we wouldn't have a melting pot now, would we? You're going to have to go in there and say, this is the American house. And just like people cannot come into my house unless I allow them, unless they satisfy my desire and my interest in being sure that they are not a threat to anyone who is already in my house that I value. In other words, I'm not going to be the guy who's in a house who already has starving children, and then I'm going to let more starving children in and then say the children that I already have, you must miss a meal, so these others who don't even live here should eat. That's not the way it works. I don't know of anybody who would do that. You feed your children first as best you can, and if you have something remaining, that goes to the ones who do not belong. We're not thinking clearly. We are allowing progressives whose sole aim is to bring people into this country who do not have legal standing to be here so that they can vote for Democrats, because Democrats have been losing elections for 9 years. This is their objective. This is their stance. And they're hiding this behind children. They are using children as human shields. They are just as bad as Iraq during either Gulf War. They would put the children and women in front of their troops and make the Americans fire over the heads of children and women in order to hit military individuals. They're doing the same now with immigration. They're just not Muslims. They're worse. They're progressives. And their attack on American sovereignty is being shielded by women and mainly children. You can't do this to them. No, you don't get it. The American nation is not only sovereign, but it is precious. It is to be defended against all who would bring it down for whatever reason they wish to bring it down. Lying about separating families, which is what they're doing, and trying to base it on biblical principle when you don't understand the Bible. Both of these things are meant to succor those who are emotionally led, because it can't move those who are intellectually resolved. It's a ruse, and you need to expose it and resist it as sane. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, talkamericaраdio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM, Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB, News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's deal with the Trump-Kim summit falsehoods, okay? You might recall back during the campaign, Donald Trump said some very direct things regarding North Korea. North Korea did not respond to it particularly well, but they simply thought they were dealing with the same old with respect to American presidents or presidential candidates. Once he got into office, the North Korean government took exception to Donald Trump not tempering his rhetoric, and they ratcheted up their behavior. They launched missiles. They conducted nuclear tests. They threatened Guam. And Donald Trump, in response to that, simply said, you know what? if you don't do this, if you don't stop this, we will destroy you. This got everybody around the world so ratcheted up that you even had this report filed by the RT UK regarding North Korea and the United States being on the brink of nuclear war.
Well, despite tensions easing slightly in recent days, a UK-based think tank has warned that Britain should be prepared for a potential war between the US and North Korea. Laura Smith has more details.
It's an independent defence and security think tank, very well regarded, and they've written this report which is urging civil servants to start preparing right away for the possible declaration of war between the US and North Korea. Here's the essence of what the report says.
A new Korean war is now a real possibility. If war did begin, the president would be on the phone to 10 Downing Street within an hour asking for support. Whitehall needs to be preparing now for a range of possible scenarios that could unfold in the coming months.
What led Ruse to produce this report was the opinion of its author that says that North Korean technical advances combined with what it calls the volatile and impulsive personality of President Trump are a dangerous combination. Although experts say that a North Korean missile could potentially reach London, there isn't really a palpable sense of panic here in the media or on the street, but that is in direct contrast to what we're seeing elsewhere. In the US, we're hearing from companies that make bomb shelters. They say that they're seeing an uptick in the number of orders, particularly from Japan, but also domestically in the US, where families are burying bomb shelters in their garden in preparation for what could be a nuclear attack. Meanwhile, in the US territory of Guam, which of course has been the target of the recent aggressive rhetoric from North Korea, they had a terrible shock overnight when radio stations accidentally broadcast an emergency warning. Residents took to Facebook to express their panic.
Testing the emergency alert system on the day that we were expecting missiles to be launched our way is a perfect way to cause mass hysteria.
Why would you test a civil danger warning on the day we're expecting to get bombed and not indicate that it's a test? This is freaking me out.
Back here in London, though, Ruse is warning that if the worst did happen, the Prime Minister would have a maximum of a few hours to decide what her position would be on that and what kind of support she can offer. And that is of particular worry, as, of course, many senior civil servants are seconded to a matter much closer to home, Brexit, when, in fact, the threat could come from further away.
So they had everybody hyped up. The UK was getting ready to go onto a war footing and saying, Donald Trump's going to come begging to us. Okay, right. This is just part of the silliness. Donald Trump has demonstrated that he really understands what's going on with North Korea. He understands part of the Asian culture known as saving face or just face, either losing face or saving face or gaining face. He understands that better, and he made the North Korean leader lose face only to help him gain it back. And as a result, you had this report filed by Fox News on the eve almost of the summit back on the 11th of June.
Let's find out what the rest of the world is saying about this summit. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is live this morning about 3,000 miles away north of here in Seoul.
The soon-to-happen summit in Singapore involving President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un getting the attention of the world.
I believe the two leaders need to be credited for the courage with which they decided to move forward with the summit.
Longtime North Korean ally China, which has a definite stake in the talks, also weighing in.
We hope it will push forward the process of denuclearization and political settlement on the peninsular issue.
As well as South Korea. President Moon Jae-in has played a critical role through his own summits with Kim leading up to these talks.
I both expect and hope that tomorrow's summit will definitely be successful.
Feelings echoed by Moon in a 40-minute phone conversation Monday with President Trump. The leader also warned, however, that the summit could be just the start of a diplomatic process that could take years. And there are other summit eve worries for the peninsula. What, if any, reference will be made to an end to the Korean War, halted decades ago with just an armistice? What security guarantees possibly offered to the North by the U.S. might mean to some 28,000 U.S. troops here? How far is the North willing to go to get rid of the nuclear threat to the region? And what will be said about the horrendous human rights record of the Pyongyang regime? One-time North Korean detainee, Korean-American Kenneth Bae, has hopes about that.
I think it's very important to see that humanitarian, human rights issues need to be addressed at this summit.
While there's now attention being given by North Korean state media to the summit activities of its leader across the border in South Korea, there is grudging respect for an unconventional U.S. president who helped bring about this one-on-one summit.
From that perspective, this man is a revolutionary in a sense. I mean, he's
revolutionary.
He's done something that nobody else has been willing to do.
South Korean President Moon also noted that it is President Trump's birthday on Thursday. What a great present it would be if the summit went well. Over to you, Chairman Kim. Brett.
Greg Palcott, live in Seoul. Greg, thank you.
Despite the progress that was made to bring it about, the press wanted to talk about all manner of things that really didn't matter. Otto Warmbier no longer matters. To his family, of course. To America as someone that was lost, that's fine. But as far as anything going forward with North Korea, as much as it troubles me, the truth of the matter is Otto Warmbier is not important. If you want to move forward with somebody, continually rubbing their nose in what you don't like about their past is two things. It is not manly behavior, neither is it productive. Which brings us to Donald Trump, after the summit, coming back and talking to a gaggle of, seems like mostly female reporters, about what occurred at the summit.
You have spoken so passionately about the circumstances that led to Otto Warmbier's death. Yeah. In the same breath, you're defending now Kim Jong-un's human rights records. How can you do that?
You know why? Because I don't want to see a nuclear weapon destroy you and your family.
Well, and by the way, you've declared the nuclear threat for North Korea is over.
I don't want to see a nuclear weapon destroy you and your family. I want to have a good relationship with North Korea. I want to have a good relationship with many other countries. And what I've done, if you remember, if you're fair, which most of you aren't, but if you're fair, when I came in, people thought we were probably going to war with North Korea.
So if we did, the threat is over. Is it over?
Quiet. If we did, millions of people would have been killed. I don't mean like, people are saying 100,000. Seoul has 28 million people 30 miles off the border. You would have had 30, 40, 50 million people killed. Who knows what would have happened? I came in, that was what I inherited. I should have never inherited. That should have been solved long before I got there. I did a great job this weekend. The fake news said, oh, you met. The only thing they saw that I gave up. One broadcast said, he gave up so much. You know what I gave up? I met. We had great chemistry. He gave us a lot. You haven't had a missile test in 7 months. You haven't had a firing. You haven't had a nuclear test in 8.5 months. You haven't had missiles flying over Japan. He gave us the remains of our great heroes. I have had so many people begging me, parents and fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, wherever I went, could you please get the remains of my boy back? They're giving them back. Nobody thought that was possible. Sir, the parents of Korean war veterans are 10 years old. They're doing so much for us. And now we're well on our way to get denuclearization. And the agreement says there will be total denuclearization. Nobody wants to report that. So the only thing I did was I met. I got along with him great. He is great. We have a great chemistry together. That's a good thing.
How can Kim love his people if he's killing them?
I can't speak to that. I can only speak to the fact that we signed an incredible agreement. It's great. And it's going to be great for them, too. Because now North Korea can develop, and North Korea can become a great country economically. It can become whatever they want. But there won't be nuclear weapons, and they won't be aimed at you and your family. We now have a very good relationship with North Korea. When I came into this job, it looked like war. Not because of me, but because if you remember the sit-down with Barack Obama, I think he will admit this, he said the biggest problem that the United States has, and by far the most dangerous problem, and he said to me that we've ever had, because of nuclear, is North Korea. Now, that was shortly before I entered office. I have solved that problem. Now we're getting it memorialized and all. But that problem is largely solved, and part of the reason is we signed number one, a very good document. But you know what? More importantly than the document, I have a good relationship with Kim Jong-un. That's a very important thing. I can now call him. I can now say, well, we have a problem. I told him, I gave him a very direct number. He can now call me if he has any difficulty. I can call him. We have communication. It's a very good thing. People are shocked that this is the kind of, they thought Trump was going to get in. He was going to start throwing bombs all over the place. It's actually the opposite.
Well, but
we're building a military so strong, $716 billion. Next year, 700 this year. We're building a military so strong, nobody's going to mess with us. But you know what? I never want to have to use it.
Can you tell us President Trump?
You notice all those women asking questions that are irrelevant. What about human rights? That's not what the summit was about. What about him? He doesn't love his people. It's not what the summit is about. That's his problem. We want things that pertain to America. What pertains to America is an end of nuclear threats, a denuclearization within the country. Well, that's being discussed. We want the return of military remains from the Korean War. Well, you got that. Those things matter to America and Americans. How Kim Jong-un treats his own people, that's their problem. Let them resolve that. This is what you don't understand, because the press didn't get the idea of what was going on. They missed the game, and Donald Trump was playing something that they did not understand, which harkens me back to what Herm Edwards said back in 2002.
You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it.
And that's what the press is doing. They're just playing to play. They're not out to win anything. This is just a matter of how do we keep people upset? How do we keep everything going? How do we continue to distract and try to delegitimize this man? That's their entire effort. Oh, by the way, over in South Korea, the KoreaExpose.com had the following to say about this. There have been an outpouring of think pieces in the U.S. media about how the Singapore summit served to benefit only North Korea and China at the expense of the U.S. and South Korea. Many outlets have focused on Trump's statement that joint military exercises with South Korea were being suspended given their provocative nature and suggest this implies Trump has no regard for an ally. This came out on the 15th, by the way. For example, the Washington Post reported Seoul has expressed concern over Trump's agreement mentioned in his news conference to cancel what he called provocative and expensive joint military exercises with South Korea. The Blue House, which in South Korea is analogous to the White House, it's their executive's residence, has given no public sign of disapproval. Indeed, it declared the June 12 Sentosa Agreement will be recorded as a historic event that has helped break down the last remaining Cold War legacy on Earth. About Trump's announcement that joint military exercises will be suspended, Defense Minister Sung Yong-moo reportedly told Jim Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, President Moon's Jae-in said if North Korea sincerely carries out denuclearization methods and earnest dialogue for the sake of reducing hostilities, if that continues between the two Koreas and between North Korea and the U.S., there has to be a flexible change in the way military pressure is applied on North Korea. In other words, you don't need it. Donald Trump's winning, also in North Korea as well as elsewhere. And that is something that the American people recognize and that our friends in the media are committed to overlooking. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of this first hour. Let's talk about the tariff deception. And all this came up, this is still campaign stuff we're talking about with respect to Trump. Donald Trump, during the campaign, was direct, again, regarding how he felt about trade with the United States trading partners. He felt that we had been taken advantage of. He felt that we were getting a raw deal. And he said that that was something he wanted to address, and he was quite comprehensive in those comments. Nobody seemed to believe him. But this is the problem with dealing with Trump. Trump says things that he means. He says other things that are fluff around what he means, but he usually says something that he means, and he meant it regarding trade. And as a result, we have the current tit-for-tat, tete-a-tete going back and forth with different trading partners regarding tariffs. And it has the punditry and the press corps around the world spinning out of control. They don't know what to make of it. They're scared to death. Trump's going to start a trade war. It's terrible. Trump said this, and China's retaliating. And you know what? Let's back up. He talked about 25% on steel and aluminum, something like that. And people went berserk. And they forget that, if I remember correctly, it was 2010 that Barack Obama, might have been 2012, but 2010 or 2012, Barack Obama put a tariff so high on Chinese steel, a particular product of Chinese steel, that China had to simply cease exporting it to the United States. It was a total tariff. It was like, you will not sell this in the United States. And I didn't remember all this talk about perhaps China's going to retaliate. In 2016, I believe it was, there was a 522% tariff levied by the Obama administration on certain steel products coming from China. Again, we didn't hear about retaliation. We didn't hear about anything. And that's because Barack Obama was an economic novice. He knew nothing. And China knew how to work around him. Donald Trump is not an economic novice. As a result, China has to respond. China tried Trump, thinking that he might possibly react the way other U.S. presidents have, because he's still part of the same political apparatus where you have scared Republicans and even more scared Democrats, because nobody in Washington, D.C., despite the rhetoric, wants the United States to exert its economic dominance over the globe. Which brings me to this thing, which is also the problem with the Republican Party. There is no sense in having an advantage if you do not plan to use it or press it. It's kind of like with the Republicans with the majority in the House. They've had the majority in the House for all but 4 years since 1994, the 1994 midterms. But what have they done with it? Now, they did something with it when they first got it. They balanced budgets, created a great economy under the era of Bill Clinton. And then they got silly. They started acting like Democrats. And in effect, they blundered all of it away and eventually lost their advantage in 2006, only to get it back in 2010 because Barack Obama and the Democrats are even more inept economically than Republicans. What is my point here? We went back and forth. People afraid of a trade war. That went on for a while. And then on April 10th, we had this occur. Because remember, we thought that we were on our way to a trade war. This is not, nobody's going to back down, right? April 10th, this report from RT.
Chinese president has announced plans to open up the Chinese economy. Xi Jinping also took veiled swipes at the United States during his speech at a meeting of Asia's financial leaders. Manila Chan's been following the story and joins us. Is this a break in the action, so to speak?
I wouldn't jump on that just yet, Ed. These were actually his very first public comments since the U.S. and China have locked horns over the tit-for-tat tariff threats over the last few weeks that we've seen. Speaking at the Bao Forum, President Xi had this to say about what he expects to continue to grow the Chinese economy beyond the 40 years or so since they actually went global.
We will lower the import tariffs for automobiles.
At the same time, we will lower tariffs on some other imports. We will work hard to respect the people's demand for superior imported products. I want to make clear to everyone that China's open door will not close, but instead will open even wider.
And in 40 years, China's economic transformation has brought it to become the world's second biggest economy, second only to the United States. Many calling some of President Xi's remarks about telling some countries to ease up on their tariffs on China as directed squarely at the United States. But President Trump is taking those remarks and making it a win for himself, tweeting this just a little bit ago. He said, very thankful for President Xi of China's kind words on tariffs and automobile barriers, also his enlightenment on intellectual property and technology transfers. We will make great progress together. Now, this baffling many since China has just recently filed a formal complaint against the United States with the World Trade Organization. The WTO will, in fact, mediate a 60-day consultation period between the U.S. and China as the two nations have continued to up the ante to a combined tune of potentially over $150 billion in tariffs levied against one another. So, Ed, I guess depending on where you sit, on which side of the Pacific you sit, that you might see President Xi's comments as either a swipe or a concession, but certainly we're just seeing the beginning of this tariff talk, Ed.
And they've said all along it's a big negotiation.
That's
Thanks,
right.
Manila.
Ed Schultz's comment at the end is comprehensive. It's a big negotiation. There's not going to be a trade war. There was never going to be a trade war. You have to understand something. Nobody can afford a trade war with the United States, because everybody exports to the United States. You need to be able to dump your goods in the United States if your economy is going to function well. You can't afford to have a trade war. You will negotiate with the United States, and Donald Trump is now saying those negotiations will be in good faith. They've been in bad faith up to this point because Donald Trump told the truth during the election. Those who represent the United States on trade internationally are inept, and they allow the world to take advantage of the United States. Notice what President Xi said of China said. He said, wait a minute, we're going to lower tariffs on automobiles, we're going to lower tariffs on other goods, and Donald Trump comes back and says, you know what, that's great, we're going to make great progress, and thank you for your concessions with respect to intellectual property and technology transfers. What, huh? I thought we were in a tit-for-tat trade war. All we're seeing is a very public trade negotiation, primarily between the United States and China. Europe tries to weigh in, and Canada tries to weigh in, but they're really not the primary players here. It is the U.S. and China, with everyone else kind of playing along. Now, fast forward to the 15th, after all the other discussions and another round of ratcheting up, there's going to be more trade and this, that, more tariffs and everything else. CNBC laid it out very clearly on the 15th of June.
No, I think that what he is doing is negotiating very, very aggressively, knowing that the other side, China in particular, is unable to retaliate in a way that is going to hurt the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy is a very low exporting economy. It exports around less than 12% of its GDP. But on the other side, you have China, who has not only massive industrial overcapacity, but needs to export more. And more importantly, it cannot grow 6.5% without the massive trade surplus with the United States. So this is a negotiation tactic. And what you know is that time doesn't work in favor of one side, China, and what the U.S. is trying to do is to achieve something in return. And think about this. Every time that Trump presents a new set of tariffs, we find, oh surprise, a new set that existed already of tariffs that China is lifting. So, in fact, what we're actually seeing is the unveiling of so many hidden tariffs, so many hidden protectionist measures from the European Union, from China, that ultimately will end up in a different perspective.
But there are some very specific industries. I mean, General Motors sells more cars in China than it does in the United States domestically.
Sure.
and most of the US automakers manufacture and assemble with Chinese finished parts.
Absolutely.
So there will be significant consequences for some industries if Trump continues down this road.
Because there will be no trade war. This is not a trade war. This is a negotiation. This is a negotiation in which the US, as your biggest customer, is saying, look, this is unfair. So we need to find a common ground.
Again, this is not a trade war. This is a trade negotiation, very public. And neither the United States nor China seem to have a problem with the public negotiation. The global news media is beside itself, except for those who actually understand economics. And then you have the fringe element, the people who are involved in the discussion but have no business in the discussion because they have no economic understanding. Chief among that group would be Justin Trudeau of Canada. Now, back on the 9th, as part of I think it was part of the economic summit, G7 meetings, I believe, when Trump had left, Trudeau decided to hold a press conference to highlight his toughness with respect to Donald Trump.
I highlighted directly to the President that Canadians did not take it lightly, that the United States has moved forward with significant tariffs on our steel and aluminum industry, particularly did not take lightly the fact that it's based on a national security reason that it's kind of insulting. And I highlighted that it was not helping in our renegotiation of NAFTA, and that it would be with regret, but it would be with absolute certainty and firmness that we move forward with retaliatory measures on July 1st, applying equivalent tariffs to the ones that the Americans have unjustly applied to us. I have made it very clear to the President that it is not something we relish doing, but it is something that we absolutely will do, because Canadians, we're polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around. I told the President that we would be moving forward with retaliatory equivalent tariffs as of July 1st, and he expressed to me that he thought that would be a mistake. And I certainly agree that it's not something that we want to do. We do not want to harm American workers. We do not want to harm trade between Canada and the United States. But the administration's choice to impose illegal and unacceptable tariffs, illegitimate and unacceptable tariffs to Canadian steel workers and auto workers and on the Canadian economy must be met with an equivalent response. I don't want to hurt American workers. They're our neighbors. They're our friends. My job is to stand up for Canadian workers, Canadian interests, and I will do that without flinching. That's what I explained to the President.
Mr. I Will Not Flinch Canada said this while his left fake eyebrow was falling off during those remarks. It was hilarious. This is someone trying to be tough. He's not tough. He's rambling. Compare what you heard from Donald Trump. Donald Trump rambles naturally, but he's also fairly specific in what he's trying to communicate. Chinese President Xi was very specific in what he was trying to communicate. Justin Trudeau was just sitting up there in front of the camera trying to act like he was tough. Let me help you out when we start talking about how tough people are. The United States economy is expected in 2018 to have a GDP of $20.4 trillion. In second place is China with about $14.1 trillion. Canada is less than $2 trillion. Canada's economy is less than a tenth of the U.S. economy. To be honest, it's less than 9% of the U.S. economy. You're not going to be tough, sir. You can't be tough. You do not have the leverage to be tough. You have the obligation to seek the best deal for your people, but you're not going to stand up to the United States. You don't have the volume. You don't have the economy. And you obviously don't have the economic experience. Donald Trump heard about his comments, by the way, and he found them quite interesting.
I left it was very friendly. When I got onto the plane, I think that Justin probably didn't know that Air Force One has about 20 televisions. And I see the television, and he's giving a news conference about how he will not be pushed around by the United States. And I say, push him around. We just shook hands. It was very friendly. And no, I have a good relationship with Justin Trudeau. I really did. Other than he had a news conference that he had because he assumed I was in an airplane and I wasn't watching. He learned that's going to cost a lot of money for the people of Canada. He learned, you can't do that. You can't do that.
That was Donald Trump pimp slapping Justin Trudeau. You don't do that. You don't have it. Let me just wrap this up and be clear. The United States and China, the two largest economies on the planet, are having a very public tit-for-tat trade negotiation. They're going to work things out. China's making concessions, and the U.S., acting as the big boy on the block and the number one customer of pretty much everybody, is saying, if you want me to pay you, then this is what I want. Customer is always right. Canada has no business even sitting at the table. They're not even at the table. If there were a kiddie table, and it had a kiddie table, there's where you would find Canada. This is hilarious. The tariff issue is no issue. This is about trade negotiations. And where other presidents and other administrations did all these things behind the scene because they were so inept that they didn't want you to know the deals that they had worked out on your behalf, Donald Trump is doing it in broad daylight, in public view, in plain sight. And all you're finding out is all the things that were being treated unfairly by other countries, and watching them make concessions in order to actually create fair trade with the United States. Love it. I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
Congress shall make no law restricting our freedom of or from religion. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, apparently city leaders in Laurel, Maryland ignore the Bill of Rights. The owners of the recently opened Ragamuffins Coffee House had planned to offer great coffee and muffins 6 days per week, holding worship services at the shop on Sundays. Once Ragamuffins was up and running, Laurel, Maryland city officials suddenly told the owners of the coffee shop to stop conducting Sunday worship or be prepared to face a $250 fine for each time they worshiped God in their shop. The small congregation of no more than 20 said that such a fine was too steep for their small gathering. The church filed a discrimination case against the city after relocating there in hopes of reaching the underprivileged, the homeless, and those not prone to attend traditional church settings. Reverend Jeremy Chuistra told the Baltimore Sun that non-Christian groups in the area are not persecuted for operating as they see fit. Well, hopefully this obvious wrong will soon be resolved in this, the land of the free. I'm Ron Edwards. Join me Fridays on AmericaMatters.us and SHRmedia.com at 4 p.m. Eastern Time and 1 p.m. Pacific Time.
Blowing away the myths and revealing the truth. You can continue to blow away the myths with Ron Edwards on Facebook, Twitter, and theronedwards.com. Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it's made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking here on the dominant force of Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. There's some pushback against those whom I call the educationists, or I could call them educationistas. In other words, the education orthodoxy, the conventionalists, the traditionalists in this country are now finding tougher going on a few fronts. Here's one that's interesting. In Kansas, this is a report from AP on the 15th of June, a Kansas law that stripped school teachers of guaranteed tenure doesn't violate state or federal constitution rules, because legislators had the power to modify or end the policy, the Kansas State Supreme Court declared. The court ruled against two veteran teachers who sued their rural school district after it did not renew their contracts in 2015. They argued that the Republican-controlled legislature deprived them of a property right through an expedited process for passing the law in 2014 that violated their right to due legal process. Well, the Supreme Court disagreed that tenure represented a property right that could not be modified or removed by lawmakers. The earlier version of the law explicitly said as much. So what are you telling me? Oh, well, guess what? At least in Kansas, you don't have a guaranteed right to tenure. No. You can be cut loose. That's a problem. Those are public school teachers. You might remember recently, let's move over to Oklahoma, because you might remember, there had been a rash of actions on behalf of teachers unions to strike in places like West Virginia, in Oklahoma and a few other states. And they went out of their way saying, you know, we need these raises because you guys have been dogging us so hard. We're not getting any money, and you keep making excuses, and we're going to act, and we're going to go on strike. We will not teach your children till you give us more money. And they went out and got some results as a result in response to their strikes. But on June 16th, this appeared in The Guardian, which is a UK publication. Striking Oklahoma teachers, the worst paid in the U.S., won a historic pay raise in the spring. Now conservative groups have targeted the tax hikes and earmarked to pay them, and by November the cash could be gone, leaving schools and educators in limbo. In March, teacher salaries in Oklahoma were raised by an average of $6,100 a year, a raise paid for by a bill that raised taxes for cigarettes, cigars, motor and diesel fuel, and gross production of energy, and initially a $5 a night hotel tax. They hit everybody. The decision in a deep red conservative state was heralded as a major victory for unions and teachers and came after a series of successful teacher strikes in other conservative states. They only went after conservative states, you recognize. But a petition now circulating among Oklahomans, translation, the people who pay the taxpayers, the folks who fund all this nonsense, and backed by a group of conservative activists, could defund the wage hikes, leaving the state's already crisis-racked school system scrabbling to find the funds to pay their teachers, and it's already triggered a confusing call for a stay of promised tax collection increases as the situation unfolds. Wow. Here's what you need to really understand. The taxpayers are getting tired of teachers jacking up whatever they want through strong-arm means. We want more money. We want a raise. We haven't had a raise. The taxpayers are saying the same thing. It's not like everything's going that way out here. Yes, the economy is better under President Trump. I hope it continues to get better, and there's every indication that it would. But that doesn't mean that just because everybody's doing better, that teachers should get more tax money. Because everyone else is getting their money the old-fashioned way. They're going out in the private sector and earning it. They're trading their skills for the market rate of cash. That's not what happens with a union, particularly not a public sector union. But you're going to have a problem there. So in Kansas, you have people saying, you're not guaranteed tenure. In Oklahoma, you say, well, we got a pay raise. Well, the people who fund that aren't saying that they're on the hook to necessarily come up with the money. Kansas, Oklahoma, since we're kind of wandering around in that area of the country, let's go over to Kentucky, where there's another problem for the educationists. And this was in the Lexington Herald Leader, an op-ed by someone who was obviously on the side of the teachers' unions. Education chief offers wrong views on charter schools. It begins, it appears that Governor Matt Bevin has appointed the fox to look after the chicken coop. He has arranged for longtime charter school promoter Wayne Lewis to become the interim Kentucky Education Commissioner. The job is to help our public schools be the best they can be, but instead of promoting our public schools, Lewis seems to want to proliferate charter schools, schools that would savage the finances of our public schools. This is because charters operate by robbing public schools of their funding. I think there's a bit of a bias there. To combat that, why don't you listen to this little piece that informationstation.org put out back in May of last year, actually saying what a charter school is.
Historically, education in the United States has been split between private schools and traditional public schools. However, this dynamic changed in 1991 when Minnesota passed the first law establishing charter schools in the state. Since then, a majority of states have some kind of charter school system. But what exactly is a charter school? Charter schools offer education ranging in grades K through 12 without charge to students. Charter schools are funded with tax dollars, but are generally subject to fewer rules and regulations than traditional public schools, and they usually receive less public funds per pupil than public schools. Charter school students typically take the same state-required standardized tests as public school students. Depending on state law, these schools can be started by parents, teachers, nonprofit groups, corporations, or even government organizations. Charter schools may focus on specific skills and subjects like math or science, or may be aimed at students who require alternative learning methods, such as teaching lessons that use visual or more hands-on approaches. But these entities just can't start one whenever they please. They must first obtain authorization from either the school district, city, or state, depending on how the charter school laws are structured. And the charter school model has achieved various levels of success. Over the past 25 years, the number of charter schools in the U.S. has skyrocketed, forcing more competition and faster improvement among existing public and private schools. As of 2016, there are almost 7,000 charter schools serving 3 million students. And since 2000, charter school enrollment has increased by 600%. But as charter schools have become more popular, opposition has grown. Teachers' unions and other public school activists argue that charter schools take money away from traditional public schools. However, it's unfair to hold minority parents and students hostage in underperforming public schools. Overall, charter schools have provided an entrepreneurial challenge to the status quo and delivered results that make it worth expanding this option for parents. According to a 2015 Stanford study, not only do charter schools provide significantly higher levels of growth in math and reading for all students, but minority and low-income students benefit disproportionately more. Charter schools are becoming a bigger part of the U.S. education system every year, and for millions of American families, they offer a much-needed choice that's different than a one-size-fits-all public school. Every other sector of the American economy has benefited from the ability to compete and improve. Why not education? To learn more about education reform, visit informationstation.org.
So charter schools take less money per pupil, operate under fewer rules, and have a disproportionately better educational outcome for minority and low-income students. Now, the person who wrote this op-ed back in the Lexington Herald Leader, his statement is this: if even one charter school were created in Fayette County, Kentucky, with 300 students, then 3.6 million would be sucked out of our public schools and handed over to the charter school, requiring 62 Fayette County public school teachers to be laid off. And there is your issue. This isn't about the welfare of the children. This is about how many unionized public school teachers are working. But they're demonstrating that charter schools can get this done with less regulation, which is what they have out there to keep the non-union folks out. You got to meet all our certifications and everything else before you can teach. And okay, fine. Well, we're just going to remove some of those rules so we don't need that. Or we're not going to get as much money as we give to per student to the public school. We're good. We're good. Because we're going to be more innovative in our approach. And this is causing a problem. Don't be surprised, by the way. This is causing a significant problem for public schools. And guess what? That's a good thing. Because public school education in the United States stinks. Period. Well, teachers are good people. Doesn't matter. Tell that to Atlanta. Tell that to Chicago. Tell that to a significant portion of Maryland, that public schools are wonderful. It's not going to fly. Atlanta's got good schools. Oh, yeah, when they're not cheating for the students to make the teachers look good. Never mind. Let's get out of the K through 12 arena and move over to the University of Michigan, shall we? Because now it's getting to be big states. Matt Bye's Political World put something out dealing with microaggressions at the University of Michigan. Jeff Sessions' Justice Department has been busy lately. The department announced in court it would no longer defend the unconstitutional conspiracy. Jeff Sessions' Justice Department has been busy lately. The department announced in court it would no longer defend the unconstitutional Obamacare law, at least not the mandate. Then, as Trump was arriving for his summit in North Korea, Sessions ruled that foreigners fleeing domestic abuse or gang violence would no longer be given sanctuary in the U.S. Both of those decisions broke with considerable precedent, and I'd argue they departed from American ideals in some fundamental way too. I don't know that they do, but I know what he's saying. But on the same day that Sessions issued his sanctuary decision, his department also announced a filing that garnered less attention. Administration lawyers filed a motion in support of conservative activists who are suing the University of Michigan, claiming that its policies against bullying and harassment violate protections on free speech. According to the New York Times, it's the fourth time that Trump's Justice Department has weighed in against policies on public campuses that seek to curb hateful or divisive rhetoric, which you could see, I guess, as an assault on tolerance and civility in keeping with so much of the Trump ethos. This is all about those so-called microaggressions. You can't have people come in and say things that the status quo on college campuses don't like. That's why you had people like Milo being thrown off of campuses. You have Ben Shapiro getting shouted down. You have people having their appointments, their contract speaking engagements canceled because of the intolerance that you have on college campuses. So Donald Trump, through the Justice Department, is saying, well, you know what? Everybody has a right to be heard, do they not? We're not saying you have to agree with them. We're saying they have the right to speak. And I know where people are going to go, what about Colin Kaepernick? Nobody stopped Colin Kaepernick from saying a word. It was a matter of when are you going to have your little message? Don't have your message on company time. Well, college campuses set aside time where people are allowed to gather and to hear these opinions because they're invited in. And they should be allowed to speak. As a matter of fact, they're contracted to come in and speak. But the progressives, who are so tolerant and civil, shout them down. They've even done physical harm to one or more. All because they determine that the things that a conservative would say, even before they get a chance to open their mouths on the college campus, are so hateful and so divisive that they must be shouted down, shut down by any means necessary. This is not Americanism. This is not free speech. But look at what's going on. Guaranteed tenure in Kansas. You don't have that anymore. We went out and we got big pay raises in a conservative state because we are the Progressive Teachers Union. Not so fast, sir. Where the money coming from? Because the taxpayers are saying, I don't think so. We hate charter schools, but charter schools work better than public schools and for less money. Why should they not be a viable option for those who actually want them? Oh, because it means public school. You have fewer public school teachers, so you have fewer people paying dues, which means you have less money in the union, which means you're starting to lose power. I get it. And then there's the ridiculousness of microaggressions. You know what? You can do all this stuff as long as you leave people's First Amendment right to speak alone. Then you can call it whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. But you can't stop people from speaking. All these are pushbacks against the education status quo in this country, and it is marvelous. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Here's a question for you. Has the homosexual agenda crested? Have we reached a high water mark, and are we starting to see a pullback from the support of just rampant homosexuality, LGBTQ, whatever else is in the alphabet, and all other forms of, quite frankly, psychosexual mental illness? How are we seeing that? Well, let's start with the fronts on which we are dealing, because at least in Colorado and other states as well, the homosexual agenda has gotten to the point where it is codified in law. And we had back in 2012 a baker named Jack Phillips who simply said, "I don't make cakes for homosexual weddings." And the state of Colorado censured him severely. Well, the case made it to the Supreme Court, and lo and behold, religious freedom, which was the basis of Jack Phillips saying, "I don't make homosexual cakes because it's against my religious beliefs," the Supreme Court actually agreed with him.
Baker, Jack Phillips is with us now, along with his attorney, Kristen Wagner. Morning to both of you.
Good morning. Jack, this has been a long road for you. Started back in 2012. Yesterday, you actually heard the words. You heard that verdict. Just tell me what your reaction was to that.
I was thrilled. The United States Supreme Court has decided that we can try and enter the wedding business again and realize that I serve everybody, and it's just that I don't create cakes for every occasion that people ask me to create.
Kristen, let me ask you, because this was a ruling overwhelmingly in Jack's favor, a 7-2 ruling, but many legal scholars have said it's narrow in scope. For somebody who is just watching this morning, does this mean that any baker or any company could just refuse services to a gay couple on religious grounds now?
Absolutely not. The court made very clear, as we made clear in our argument before the court, that Jack loves and serves anyone who walks into a store, but he doesn't express all messages. And that was critical for the court's decision. Justice Kennedy made clear that religious hostility by the government has no place in a pluralistic society. And that was critical to his ruling.
Jack, some people may look and they might think, wow, you know, I think this guy is discriminating. 50 years ago, it was interracial marriage. You couldn't go in and some people wouldn't give you goods or services. And now this guy's doing that. What's your reaction to that?
I don't discriminate against anybody. I serve everybody that comes in my shop. So I'll say again, I don't create cakes for every message that people ask me to create.
So if a gay couple came in and said that we'd like some cupcakes for our
Absolutely.
wedding.
I told these two men when they came to the store, I'll sell you cookies, brownies, birthday cakes. I'll make you custom cakes. I'll make anything.
It's just
for
the
you.
art of the cake.
This cake is a specific cake. A wedding cake is inherently religious. A wedding is an inherently religious event, and the cake is definitely a specific message that goes with that.
We have to remember that in Jack's case, as the court said, he's an expert baker. So when you go into a cake shop, he sketches, he sculpts, he hand paints these custom cakes that are one-of-a-kind cakes. And that's what the court dealt with yesterday. It also said that people of goodwill need the space necessary to disagree on this issue. And it's distinguished cases involving interracial marriage in the past with the decent and honorable beliefs of Jack and millions of Americans like him that believe marriage is between a man and a woman of all different faiths, Jewish, Muslim.
There are other cakes I know you don't create on religious grounds, such as?
I don't create cakes for Halloween. I wouldn't create a cake that would be anti-American or disparaging against anybody for any reason. Even cakes that would disparage people who identify as LGBT. Cakes have a message, and this is one that I can't create.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate it.
7-2 decision. Being construed as narrow, but remember what they said. Remember what was said by the justice who wrote the opinion. You can't have the government being hostile toward religion in a pluralistic society. But that's exactly what all these laws that are anti-discriminatory in favor of homosexuals are. They are hostile to the exercise of religious faith. So they want to say it's construed narrowly, but those words are going to come back. Tell me how you are not being hostile to the exercise of religious faith in a pluralistic society. This is a big blow, and people are making an effort to do everything they can to try to say how narrow it was. 7-2 is not narrow. Someone saying based on his sincere religious beliefs, he cannot be compelled to do something he does not want to do. And then there's the tired and ridiculous, well, what about interracial marriage? What does this have to do with interracial marriage? You know what? The truth of the matter is you could have gone someplace else, even in 1968, and gotten interracially married. You could have done that. You wanted to do it where you wanted to do it. You wanted everybody to agree with you. Now, their reasons were not religious. Their reasons were simply racist. Well, they cited the Bible. I said, yeah, but there's nothing in the Bible against interracial marriage. As a matter of fact, you can find several interracial marriages in Scripture. You can find Joseph and his wife. You can find Moses and his wife. You can go on and on. It's a tired argument. It's a bogus argument. And it's also showing that we may have reached a high water mark for support of homosexual agenda issues, and we might be moving in the opposite direction. Something else happened recently which I found very interesting. The Hill came out on the 11th of June and ran this story. The Pentagon declines to acknowledge LGBT Pride Month for the first time since the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The Pentagon has declined to acknowledge Pride Month for the first time since the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy during the Obama administration. Wow. Oh, so you're telling me this is another part of what I call the Serve Pro Donald Trump effort, which is to make 44, as in 44th President Barack Obama, make 44 like it never even happened. Because we didn't do Pride Month before Obama showed up, and now we're not doing it anymore. The Washington Post reported that the Pentagon did not issue a memo marking Pride Month, which is usually circulated annually at the beginning of Pride Month in June. The memo's absence has reportedly caused concerns among those in the armed forces who are concerned about President Trump's announcement last year that he would block transgender individuals from serving in the military. Again, we're stepping back from the high water mark. Now, for those who have a problem with it, and I know there are those who do, sounds like a personal problem to me. I don't have a problem. This is as it should be. Well, you want to discriminate. No. You do. Let's make sure we understand something. Until less than 45 years ago, homosexuality and all these forms of sexual deviation were recognized as mental illness. It hasn't changed. There is something not quite right with these behaviors. They are psychosexual and they are disorders. You don't have to, I don't agree with that. It doesn't matter. But what we're going to do is take our thumb off the scales in the favor of people who have a homosexual agenda, and you need to make your case in the marketplace of ideas instead of trying to find the courts to back you up. I find that fascinating. Supreme Court 7-2 saying that, well, you can't force him to do something that's against his religion. The Pentagon says, well, now that Obama is gone, we're not recognizing this. Here's another one that is really important, because this one was destined to start getting some blowback. Now, it's not getting the blowback that I believe it should because of where this occurred. But last week in Connecticut, ABC News ran this story about high school track.
Topic in Connecticut, some parents and students are fighting to change a policy that allows transgender athletes to compete as the gender they identify with. Petitions are circulating in Plainville and Glastonbury after two trans girls swept the competition at the state track and field championships. Some parents feel the girls had an unfair advantage biologically. The Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference says the policy to allow them to compete on the girls' track team directly aligns with state law.
Do you have certain people that believe that, men are stronger and faster? Some females will feel a particular type way about it.
I think she should be able to run in a race because she can use the ladies' room. She can wear skirts. Why not run and play sports and stay active?
Sophomore Andrea Yearwood says she's been extremely grateful for the opportunity to run track for her high school and be treated as the person she has always identified as.
Just so we're clear, these are boys who ran in a girls' track meet, and shock to no one, the two boys finished first and second. The gentleman who spoke saying, well, some people feel that boys are stronger and faster than girls. I'm sorry, that's not a feeling. That is a biological fact. Males are stronger and faster than females. That's not a discriminatory statement. That's an empirical statement. That's an objective statement. Can you find some instances where it's different? Sure. But they're not trying to compete in any sport either. There are plenty of boys out there who can't outrun girls, but they're not trying to run track either. It got more interesting to me when you actually had a local affiliate, WTNH, pick up this story. This is also on the 13th of June. And they seemed to pick up a little bit more pushback at the local level than you saw from ABC at the national level.
Change, that's what some are calling for after two transgender teens swept events during last week's track and field state championship.
One of the other girls who competed and her mother say the pair had an unfair advantage and that it's time for the governing body of the high school athletics to change their rules. News's Amy Hudak tells us about the petition they started. Amy?
The rule for high school athletics is that the student can compete for the gender-specific sport they identify with. One parent who started a petition says she doesn't necessarily want to reverse the policy. She actually wants to add to it. Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood smoked the competition at last week's state championships for track and field.
When you look at the competitions and they turn into a complete blowout, you realize that something is different.
Miller and Yearwood are both transgender. Born boys, they raced against the girls. Selena Sewell competed with them and says it's an unfair advantage.
I have no problem with them being a girl and wanting to be a girl. My issue is with CAC.
The CIAC says their policy follows state law. Teens can compete for the team they gender identify with. Sewell's mother, Bianca Stanascu, started a petition in Glastonbury, not to change the rule, but to add to it.
My solution is to come up something similar to NCAA. If they did complete a hormone therapy, and just like the Olympics require a waiting period, yes, at that point they should be allowed to compete as a female.
And if they don't complete hormone therapy?
They could run at the same time with the girls, but take the times and post them somewhere else. Inclusivity, and in this particular case, fairness, can both be maintained.
A second petition is also circulating in Plainville. Stanascu says she's invited the CIAC and the transgender community to sit down together, but hasn't heard back. The CIAC says it's tricky legal territory. In Connecticut, teens transitioning have to be at least 16 and meet specific requirements to undergo hormone therapy. Miller and Yearwood are just sophomores. It's unclear if they've started hormone therapy. Many in the community, including those petitioning against the CIAC, are praising Miller and Yearwood for their courage.
Andrea Yearwood actually stepped out at the New England Championship to give the spot to another girl.
The CIAC says they're open to talking about this and possibly sitting down and meeting with some of the participants who are involved, but it's such a complex issue.
Yeah, it's really complicated.
And there's a lot of legal territory as well, so.
A lot of people. A higher court.
Really? Now, one thing that was said during that clip was inclusivity and fairness, with the clear implication that they are not operating the same. Now, here is something that people seem not to remember. If you go to, say, a race that is a marathon race, there is no separate race for male and female. Everybody runs. They sound the gun. Now, those who have the best likelihood or the best chance of winning are in the front, because it's usually a herd that is running, at least starts a marathon. And those who are most likely to be able to win, either male or female, are allowed to start from the front of the pack instead of being buried behind those who may finish the next day. But still, everybody runs, and then they record the times, and then they take the times, and then they sort them out by different divisions, male, female, whatever age, this, that, and the other. If you were not trying to push an agenda, you could do the same thing at track meets. Let's all run in these heats, and we're going to run boys, girls, everybody run. And we're just going to see who runs the fastest. And then after all the times are in, we're going to categorize you. Why don't they do that? Because this isn't about inclusivity. This is about indoctrination. This is about trying to tell people that fat meat ain't greasy. Well, it's tricky legal territory. No. It's not legal territory. It is ideological territory written into law. So if everybody tells me, well, it's against the law, slavery was legal. That was legal. Jim Crow was legal. As a matter of fact, Jim Crow was law. That was the law. So I don't want to hear the legal argument. The question was it right? Well, these people should run as whatever they should do whatever they identify as. You know what? Transgenderism is known in the DSM-5 as gender dysphoria, which is a treatable mental illness. It is in the manual that the APA uses to identify and catalog mental illness. It's right there. You, instead of saying we need to help these people, you're trying to say you need to foist this on everybody else, and that's a problem. It's just wrong. We need to stop it, and the only question is whether or not we will. But at this point, even in Connecticut, they're having a little bit of a problem with this, which I think is a positive thing. I think that homosexuality and its agenda have reached its high water mark, and the rain has stopped. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. Unions are coming under pressure. We talked a little bit earlier about the reversal that may be going on in Oklahoma for teachers unions that actually won a victory that resulted in higher pay. But now the taxpayers seem to be moving and saying, you can get all you want on contract, but the money's not going to be there. And therefore your raise is going to be negated the old-fashioned way with no cash. But in other places, we have different things going on. For example, in Iowa, the court there, an Iowa court, ruled that union workers may sue for wrongful damages. Well, how is that a reversal for the union? Well, it's actually moving sideways. This is the Iowa Supreme Court. 2 former Iowa workforce development judges may sue the agency for wrongful discharge after the Iowa Supreme Court made significant rulings in their cases Friday that could have broad implications for other state workers. So, what happened? Susan Ackerman sued in January 2015, making allegations including retaliation, defamation, emotional stress, etc. She appealed to the Supreme Court after a judge dismissed the wrongful discharge allegation. The judge concluded that state employees under contract have avenues to address their grievances through the contract and cannot seek damages, monetary damages, in a lawsuit. But the state's highest court ruled for the first time in Iowa that workers under contract have the same right to file a lawsuit as any other worker. Why is this a problem possibly for unions? What did you just hear? Workers under contract have the same right to file a lawsuit as anybody else. Then I don't need a union. And the protections of the union are not necessarily advantageous to me. If I can find better representation without it, then the union is not quite as valuable. But that's not the real big issue. Back in February, the Supreme Court started hearing arguments in a case that's called Janus versus AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees. And this was about something that is the mother's milk of all politics, and particularly liberal or progressive politics, and that is taxpayer money. Well, in this case, it's not taxpayer money. It is union dues, which are compulsory, by the way. But maybe not quite so much now. Soledad O'Brien on Matter of Fact TV did a pretty extensive piece on this back in February. And she even had a law professor on to explain some of the details.
Later this month, the U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments on what is being billed as the biggest labor case of the century. It's called Janus versus the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees.
I work for Healthcare and Family Services, and I'm forced to pay money to a union that then supports political causes that I don't agree with.
The Janus case threatens to overturn 40 years of precedent. If we lose this case, the entire public sector will be right to work.
The head of the California Teachers Union, which defended a similar case before the Supreme Court back in 2016, calls the Janus case a blatant political attack and warns unions stand to lose millions of dollars and with it their power to negotiate benefits, pensions, and salaries for public workers. UCLA law professor Eugene Wallach is a fierce First Amendment advocate. He filed a friend of the court brief in the Janus case, and he joins us from Los Angeles today. It's so nice to have you with us. This case is so complicated that I really would love for you to explain it to us kind of in pieces. So let's start with where the case begins, with Mark Janus, who was working for the state of Illinois, a non-union member. He had to pay dues. Why did the Supreme Court get involved in this case?
So about 40 years ago, the Supreme Court held that when somebody is being required to pay dues to a union, or what's often the same thing when dues are taken out of his paycheck automatically, then that raises a First Amendment issue, because the theory is that's compelled association. And the Supreme Court said, well, that's okay. Despite the First Amendment issue, it's okay to withdraw such dues from a paycheck when they're being used to promote collective bargaining purposes, because that's a way of preventing non-union members from free riding on the work of the union. But it's not okay when those dues are taken out for and used for political purposes. So there has to be a mechanism for people who object to the political uses to get a refund, or get essentially to prevent their money from being used this way.
So if you go back to that 40 years ago case that you're mentioning, do you believe it was framed incorrectly as a First Amendment issue?
I'm a big believer in free speech protections and protection from compelled speech as well. But the question is, what counts as a speech compulsion? And requiring you to pay money is not something that is generally seen as a speech compulsion, even if the money is used for political purposes. One way we know that is we're compelled to pay our taxes. And those taxes are often deducted from our paychecks, and some fraction of those taxes may be used for speech we disagree with, maybe for public education, which may teach some ideas we disapprove of, or for urging people to recycle, or for a position to for speech that expresses a position to racism or religious bigotry, or speech that urges people to enlist in the military. Lots of taxpayers may object to that. But we don't view that as a First Amendment problem, that their money is being taken by the government to be used for government speech.
The court has already looked at this case, and in fact it was decided in that 4-4 because there are only 8 justices on the court at that time. Now that you have the new Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch, there are lots of people who expect, in fact, that they'll rule 5-4 in favor of Mark Janus. What would that then literally mean?
A victory for Janus would indeed be something of a defeat for unions, and some people say that's good. Some people say it would be a victory for taxpayers because they wouldn't have to deal with public employee unions quite as much. So as a practical matter, it'll have all these effects and probably hard to predict effects.
Professor Eugene Volokh with us today. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Always a very great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of legal gobbledygook, or that's not necessarily fair. He tried to make it as plain as possible. I think he did a reasonable job. He said something about coerced speech or compelled association, and he actually brought in taxation and saying that, well, it's kind of like if people pay taxes, we don't think that's a First Amendment issue, because it is not. If that were the case, then the 16th Amendment would have been a problem. However, there's a big difference between saying, well, you don't have a choice in paying taxes, as opposed to whether or not you should have a choice in paying dues as part of an organization that you may or may not want to be in. If you're a non-member part of a union, why should you pay dues? The other thing with a union does not provide for the things that the government does under the Constitution, either state or federal. Those things are a matter of law. Not everybody benefits from what the union does. As a matter of fact, you can demonstrate that some things that unions do are definitely not beneficial. But the issue is, and this is from an article posted by The Hill, the issue is whether First Amendment rights are violated when public sector collective bargaining agreements include an agency fee clause, some call it a fair share clause, requiring all employees of the union to pay union dues. It means those who aren't even in the union, you have to pay dues. The court heard an argument on the same issue 2 years ago, but Justice Scalia died before the court issued its decision. Kind of makes you wonder why he's no longer with us. And the other justices split 4-4. That would make Gorsuch, the most recent appointee to the bench, the swing vote. He asked no questions, didn't ask any questions at the oral arguments, and didn't tip his hand. Most believe he would probably cast the same vote that they expect that Scalia would have cast, and therefore decide in favor of the non-union member employee who was compelled to pay dues. Think about what you're saying. I'm not part of your organization, but you're making me pay dues, and then you're going to take those dues that you're making me pay and use them for things that, if the money were left with me, I wouldn't use it for that. Particularly those things that are political. Now, if you're going to bargain on my behalf, I don't have a problem with that. It's your political speech. Now, there are a bunch of ways to handle this, but none of the ways to handle this appeal to the unions. You could differentiate and try to separate out the funds, but we know that wouldn't work because money is fungible, which means a dollar is a dollar. A dollar doesn't come in and you're unable to spend it one way or another once it comes in. You can make whatever arbitrary moves that you want, but it doesn't change anything. This is a big deal. It really comes down to this. If I'm not a member of your union, one, why am I compelled to pay dues? Oh, it's fair share. Oh, really? Okay. And why are you free to use my money however you wish when I'm not even a member of your organization? That seems appropriate to someone? It's not a big deal. It's a big deal to this gentleman. And it wouldn't matter how much money it was. Now, the Chicago Tribune came back with an argument that said, well, should courts have the power to impose wage cuts, shrink the economy, and require private organizations to deliver costly services for free. Some of that sounds like what Obamacare did, and the court exactly decided to do that by declaring the individual mandate a tax, which is something that Congress didn't even do, wouldn't do, were afraid to do. But they did. This is a big deal. The Supreme Court could very well not surprise us this time and strike down something that is a linchpin for progressivism, union dues money, which in effect is tax money, by the way, because these are public sector unions being paid by the taxpayers, and then they're funneling some of that tax money back into the union coffers for political purposes. This would be huge. So if you look at this, what we're talking about in this entire show, we're talking about making America great. We're dealing with immigration. We're dealing with international affairs, with what happened in North Korea. We're dealing with tariffs and the lies that are being told there, and the pushback against the traditional education lobby, the homosexual agenda not quite faring as well as it used to, and now unions coming under pressure. This is all part of making America great. Again, because we're actually trying to make people free. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. My prayer. And until next week, should the Lord say the same, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.